the idea of some of the misconceptions, but also enlighten us on what Jesus was thinking, what he was meaning when he used this passage. So if you will, turn to Matthew 16, or you can follow on the screen. We're going to start with verse 13. And this is that passage where Peter declares that Jesus is the Messiah. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Well, who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Well, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." Now understand what was going on during this time. There was a belief that quite possibly any one of these prophets could come back to life. It was a belief between the Pharisees, not the Sadducees, but the Pharisees. And so there was always this kind of a thing that they may reappear at any given point. And so Jesus comes, he's doing all these incredible miracles. And so he starts off from water to wine until he feeds the 5,000, until he crosses the sea on foot. All of these miracles are taking place, and his crowds of people followed him, so he gets away with his disciples, and he says, "Well, who do people say that I am?" Well, they say some John the Baptist. He got his head cut off, but he's come back to life. Others Elijah, some of these other prophets. And in verse 15, Jesus says, "But what about you? Who do you say that I am?" Make no mistake that Peter doesn't even take a breath when he responds. I don't know if all 12 felt this way. I probably believe they did. But Peter just jumps right up and he says, "Well, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Do you know, if Peter had made that claim in town with the Sadducees and the Pharisees and the lawyers of the Mosaic Law, he could have been stoned to death if he did not have proof to back it up. But they're up on this mountain, they're a little bit safe. But see, Peter had been around him and seen him do all of these things. So he says, "Well, you're the Christ. You're the Messiah. You're the Son of the living God." And Jesus says in verse 17, he says, "Well, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. This was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven." Now, there he spoke to Peter personally. Here he's going to speak to Peter personally one more time, but then he'll become plural with his speech. So let's look at what happens to Peter, okay? First of all, in verse 17, he says, "Simon, son of Jonah, this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven." And kind of where he changes his name, he says, "And I tell you that you are Peter." The Greek word for that is Petros. Petros means a chip or a little stone. It means a piece of a rock. It doesn't mean the big giant boulder or mountain. It means a small rock on a mountain, or it means a piece of a rock, of a larger rock, okay? And so what Jesus is saying to Peter, you're a piece of the rock. You're a pebble. That's not a put down, okay? So and that's where we get the name Peter, Petros. And so Jesus says to Peter, "You're Petros." And he says, on this Petros, so what he says, you are a piece of the rock, but on this huge rock. Follow me. Petros, Peter, little rock. You are a little rock. But upon this big rock, Petros, I will build my church. What was he talking about? Well, first of all, he's not talking about there on that specific mountain. He is saying, I'm going to build my church on the statement, the huge foundation, the huge rock that you made, that I am the Christ, the Son of the living God. I'm going to build my church on that premise, upon that huge rock, is what he is saying. Okay? So, put this together again real quick. Here's what he says. Who do people say that I am? Some say you're a prophet. Well, who do you say that I am? Peter says, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus says, upon that statement that I am the Christ, the Son of the living God, I will build my church. And the very next thing he says there, he says, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. Now, verse 19, he goes and he says, and I'll give you the keys of the kingdom, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. So what has happened here is this. Jesus says, Peter, you are right. On this rock I'll build my church. Then he says, in verse 19, he says, I will give you. The word you now becomes plural. It's not just to Peter, but it's to the 12 disciples. Okay, now, there's a phrase in there where he says, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I think most translations use the word Hades. Some translations will use the word hell. But the word should not be hell. The word should be Hades. So here's what I want to do. I want to tell you the difference between Hades and hell before we go on with this premise. The difference between Hades and hell. Hades is a place or a realm of the dead. It's not the fiery pit where Satan exists and there's gnashing of teeth and burning. Hades is considered, in the Jewish culture, a place when you die where you go. It's also been believed that there is a place that you go if you've been good and a place you go if you've been bad that is not hell. Hades is for the souls that have not followed God. Paradise is considered the place for the souls who have followed God. So when Jesus says the gates of Hades will not overcome it, he is talking about the realm of the dead. He's not talking about the place of eternal suffering that has been created by God for the devil and all those who follow the devil. Okay? But we have sometimes, even early Christian fathers have confused that and said what this means is that the gates of hell is going to attack the church. And that's where I want to go with how we have misused this phrase. And the first misuse of this phrase that says the gates of hell should not prevail against it is one that I hear often, and it's one that is often misused. A lot of people wonder what it means. Okay, so when he says, and the gates of hell will not overcome it, they wonder, who is the it? A lot of them have it refers to the church of God, the church of Christ, Christ's church. And so, in other words, how they look at this is the fact that hell is kind of like attacking the church. And the church is going to stand strong. That's how a lot of people look at it. So, number one, the church will survive is a misuse. Okay? Notice that first misuse. The church will survive. In other words, they view hell as this battering ram. The gates of hell is a battering ram that's going up against heaven or against the church. That's not the case. Gates are defensive, not offensive. And so there's a lot of times where this is being confused. And so they look at it as though the church is being defensive and hell or Hades is being offensive and we're going to withstand. But it doesn't say that. It says the gates of hell will not prevail. So first of all, we know this is definitely not the idea that hell is trying to invade heaven and our gates are going to stand strong. There's a second misuse, and it's a very serious potential error. It's the idea of the church storming into hell or storming into Hades. Now, although there is a little bit of a truth to that, and I'll talk about that, it is not the idea of the church being a battering ram and going up against the gates of hell and crushing it down. However, what did Jesus mean? We're going to talk about that. In a sense, the church will be successful over the gates of hell. But let's look at a few things first. The church must be offensive